Frane. Hello to everybody. As Frane announced, I'm Lalić Novak, Professor of Public Administration here at the Faculty of Law. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers, of course, for the invitation to present this topic, which is on the evidence-based lawmaking in migration regulation. In my presentation, I will briefly explain what is evidence-based lawmaking, with a focus, of course, on migration issues, and show some examples at the international, EU, and national level. So, what is evidence-based lawmaking? The idea of evidence-based lawmaking is, we can say, relatively new, but draws on the extensive body of evidence-based areas, such as the evidence-based medicine, policy, management, etc. Some authors describe this move towards evidence-based legislation as the legislator, in his choices for legislative interventions, takes a rational and focused approach and does not let himself be guided by just political and ideological reasoning, but also by relevant results of scientific inquiry, assessing the expected effectiveness of those interventions. Politicization relates to reasoning from values and the priorities of resulting political action, and thus defined by ideology. Rationality, in contrast, resonates with the idea of behavior based on the expertise. But both concepts have legitimizing power. Nonetheless, the notions underlying the concepts are profoundly different. Thus, politicization is linked to democracy, and participation of people in collective decision-making, while the legitimizing power of rationality derives from expertise, resulting in so-called technocratic decision-making. So, evidence-based lawmaking has been interpreted by many, especially practitioners working for the government, as a promise of better analytical techniques leading to improved societal outcomes. In the EU, the European Commission announced its better regulation policy in white paper on European governance, adopted in 2001, which aims to constantly improve the quality, efficiency, and simplicity of legal acts. Following this, the Commission developed a number of measures aimed at better regulation in the EU. Some of those are, for example, regulatory impact assessment, a reduction of administrative burdens, and the simplification of legislative text, codification and recasting of existing legal acts, consultations, of course, with the stakeholders, evaluations and fitness checks before any revision, use of knowledge throughout expert groups or external consultations, better legal drafting, higher accessibility of legal acts, better implementation of the EU regulation at the level of the member states, and independent quality control. The Commission recently reiterated its strong commitment for the future use of better regulation instruments, stating that the need for evidence-based policy making supporting EU political priorities is only growing stronger. Under the EU influence, many better regulation instruments are being introduced in policy and lawmaking processes in the member states, including, of course, Croatia. However, although evidence-based lawmaking is attracting increasing attention from academics and, of course, lawmakers, there is also some skepticism over the broader use of evidence. So it is argued, for example, that the lawmaking process is becoming more technical and fact-oriented, that policymakers and politicians are not always willing to take data on scientific and expert insights into account. That the lawmaking process is controlled by different, very often competing rationalities and values. And finally, that there is not only the question of validity of research findings, but also on many occasions the question of contradictory research results and evidence. Going to the evidence-based lawmaking in migration area, including asylum issues and the integration into society of migrants, we all know, I think all the migration scholars are aware of the fact that the migration matters have been viewed by many as the so-called wicked problems, implying that complexity that has sets of values in tension, and as a result, they cannot be handled with what we call the old management or leadership mindset, or with old organizational structures. If wicked problems cannot be solved, policymakers may instead need to focus on managing or coping with the issues in case. Taking this into account, we can see that the evidence-based lawmaking in migration is advocated in many countries and require so-called rational and depoliticized migration policies that are based on the evidences. This has resulted in the launching of different initiatives, such as the establishment, for example, in some of the countries, of expert committees or the use of scientific reports and other evidences by the policymakers, but with, of course, varying impacts and effects depending on the country, political culture, and other, of course, the migration data and similar. And policymakers may find three categories of evidences valuable. First is data on migration flows, stocks, and of course the definition of migrant groups. Researches that investigates the efficacy of migration policy, and the researches on the impacts on migration and migrants into the host society. However, in the researches, it is already acknowledged that the complex or these wicked issues, such as migration governance, there are limits to the evidence-based lawmaking because evidences can be highly disputed by the policymakers. The political imperative today is to control, as we know, and limit migration, which has, in a way, overruled the use of evidence in shaping policy responses and legislation. But there are, of course, the examples at the level of international or global community, European Union, and I will show you some results of the national, being Croatian, researches on this topic. If we talk about the use of migration evidences in international arena, we can use the example or show the example of preparation of the UN Global Compact for Safe, Orderly and Regular Migration. So in January 2018, when presenting the report Making Migration Work for All, UN Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, argued explicitly that facts rather than myths, meaning knowledge and research, are required for improved management of international mobility to protect migrants and promote the national and human benefits of migration. Subsequent revisions of the draft text of the Compact maintain the priority of the role of data and research in evidence-based migration policies and the general objective for a, quote, a robust global evidence based on international migration by improving and investing in the collection, analysis and dissemination of accurate, reliable and comparable data. The preparatory process for the Compact that was implemented in 2017 and 18 generated compelling specificity in arguments for the need for data, research and capacity building regarding scientific analysis of international and forced migration within the interrelated policy context of sustainable development and human rights. The community of population and migration scientists and scholars participated actively in this process of preparation and consultations for the Global Compact. And some of the authors concluded that this extensive process of consultations and information gathering, characterized by the comprehensiveness and inclusion to inform the preparation of the Global Compact on migration, was unprecedented. Going to the use of evidences in the EU, what we can see is a sort of the shift to more politicization than use of the evidences in preparing the different regulation, including the pact that Professor Goldner-Lang just explained. So the use of evidences in the policy and lawmaking in migration issues is, of course, advocated by EU institutions, especially the Commission, within its better regulation agenda. Taking into account that migration is among the most challenging today, I would say, issues in the EU, the Commission in many occasions reiterated that grounding regulation on migration on evidence should contribute to well-informed decision making at both EU and national level. However, new measures within the Asylum and Migration Pact are proposed when the application of EU existing legislation in this area, including migration and asylum, has not been adequately evaluated, and that these new measures are proposed without proper impact assessment. We can say that this requests the important question with regard to the Commission's own better regulation guidelines, moving the role of the Commission to be more ideologically political, where ideology as a steering factor moves beyond the Commission's original central ideological project of integrating Europe. In regard to EU asylum legislation, which is currently in force, researchers also shows that the evidence-based lawmaking presents a number of pitfalls, including lack of impact assessment, sometimes instrumentalization of migration data, and also oversimplification of available evidences. Similar is observed also in the field of integration, immigrant integration policy making, although since early 2000s, a growing number of initiatives have sought to promote an evidence culture in that area. I'm sorry. I have to switch to mobile because my printer did not print the whole presentation, so I'm very sorry. And I have, of course, the glasses, so I need to see where I stopped. I'm very sorry. This has included EU institutions encouraging EU member states to use for example, common indicators to monitor integration outcomes, and the launch of promising evidence-informed integration pilot projects. But while tools and techniques exist to evaluate what works, migrant integration, research has shown, continues to lag behind other policy areas when we talk about the evidence-based lawmaking and policy making within the EU. With regard to the national regulation and the use of evidences in preparing national regulation, I will just briefly explain or show the research that has been conducted in 2021 by myself and two other colleagues, where we tried to analyze the extent to which the recent, at that time, in force Croatian regulation on migration is grounded in evidence. By that we wanted to provide a deeper insight into the development of migration regulation in all phases of the legislative process, so meaning from the agenda setting to the adoption of the regulation. And this analysis showed that when talking about the regulation and policy documents, there is a lack of use of evidences by the policymakers, both at the Ministry of Interior, which is the main body in Croatia for all the migration issues, to the Parliament, to the MPs in the Parliament, and also to you by the use of the evaluations when proposing the changes or the new regulation. For example, we analyze the enactment phase of the regulation processes, and we analyze what the members of the Parliament ask from the government, meaning from the public administration, state public administration. Do they ask when they are voting and deciding on the legislation? Do they ask about the evidences which should be the ground for the proposed legislation? And what we saw, expectedly or not, but expectedly, that they usually do not ask for the evidences. If they do ask, they very rarely refer to researches on the impact of migration policies and regulation in practice. For example, when it comes to evaluation, we also concluded that the evaluation reports are taken into account only in soft law documents, for example, the action plan for the integration of refugees and migrants into Croatian society. And usually evidence is also, although there is a number of researchers in Croatia about the impact and the effectiveness of migration policies and regulation, those are not used by the decision makers. This research was conducted in 2021, but the situation is, I would say, same today. For example, now is in the pipeline the new migration policy document for Croatia, but for the preparation of that document, to my best knowledge, none of the scientific or experts outside of the public administration, a part of one of the institutes for migration and ethnic studies, were not included in the preparation processes. And of course, this process of preparation of migration policy is not public one, so we still don't have any information about the values or the approach that this new document will take into account as one of the most important strategic documents, of course, in the area of migration. So going to the conclusion, we can say that we can see, well, I mean migration scholars, we can see that there is a number of researches, evaluations, papers which are produced on the migration issue. So we might even conclude that the migration research is at the peak of its productivity if we are going looking at the past. There is still a substantial gap between the scientific evidence and the policy action. Although, of course, there are pitfalls in the use of bad regulation instruments in the lawmaking process, we consider that a very useful role is played by evidence-based lawmaking in a complex social issue such as the migration, which is often very labeled with the conflicting positions of different actors and proponents. So those values can, go from the very human rights-based approach to very controlling and the securitization approach that is usually characterized, of course, by the ministry, for example, my Ministry of Interior, as a state body which is in a position of protecting the border, protecting the legal order, and then, of course, human rights activists, academics, and which are on the different side. And this is especially the case in this aftermath, we can call it like this, of the refugee migration crisis in 2015 and 16. And what we see, of course, is the growing politicization of migration policies, and the using of the evidences in developing policies can be used as an argument against the populistic tendencies which we can see in many countries, not only the Central European or Eastern European countries, but we can see it also in the Western democracies, no, without quotes, of course, within the Western democracies, but those who were, traditionally were open towards the migration and the migrants coming to their countries. As the last thought, I would say that the future of evidence-based lawmaking heavily depends also on the capacities to produce high quality evidences by both external and as well as internal actors and stakeholders. And in addition, this is also what our research in 2021 has shown, that evidences are most beneficial in the early preparatory phases of lawmaking, when there is enough time for the proper planning process and developing of the principles and goals of national, European and international migration policies and regulations. Thank you.